Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov, and welcome to Tanya and You Chapter 17. Wow, we are up to 17 already. And what an amazing chapter. What an amazing parak this is. We'll get right to it. We'll start with l'chaim on our coffee. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvarei. Okay, so open it if you have a Tanya chapter 17, by the way, I'm using over here a Tanya that was actually printed here in Metairie, Louisiana. You see it right at the beginning. It's actually written in Hebrew. It's kind of backwards on the screen. Metairie, Louisiana, and English as well. Printed in Metairie. There's in the 1980s. There ever had almost like a Tanya campaign, a strong emphasis and encouragement to print Tanyas in every town, in every village, in every neighborhood almost where there are Jews. And when people open a Tanya and they'll see, look, Metairie was printed in Metairie, it was printed in Philadelphia, it was printed in New Orleans, it was printed in Shreveport or in Lafayette or in Morgantown, wherever it is. Um, they get excited and they may study Tanya even with more excitement. So that's the Tanya that we use over here. It is an amazing idea. Till today, we're printing Tanyas all over the world, in Gaza, and we're not. So that's the Tanya that I'm using today. We're in chapter 17. With chapter 17 is almost like it's a conclusion of the first section of the Tanya. It kind of wraps it all up. Sometimes it takes a while to develop an idea, right? In order to properly understand something, you got to develop it, right? So you got to give us some information. So we had chapter 1 through 16, and really where it's all out, what's the message of the Tanya? Chapter 17. This is the big idea. And the idea of chapter 17 is being a Benoni is practical, is within reach. It's human. You and I can be a Benoni. That's the argument of the Tanya from the beginning, from the start. In fact, going back to the title page already, if you remember the first class that we had on Tanya, we studied the title page. And in the title page, it quoted a verse on Deuteronomy, a powerful verse. And the Tanya says, we are here to understand this verse, how to make it practical. And what's that verse? And in the beginning of this week's chapter, chapter 17, we kind of go back to this verse to analyze it and try to understand. So I'm actually going to share my page for a moment because I have that verse up. You can also see it in Tanya's title page. But here, do you see my screen? The verse reads as follows from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 14. Ki karoiv elecha hadavar ma'oid, beficha uvilvavcha la'asoisoi. It, the Torah, the ways of the Torah, service of God, is not just close to you. It is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you keep it, that you do it. This is the big verse. This is like the welcome to Judaism verse. You walk into a synagogue for the first time, you feel maybe intimidated, maybe you feel out of place, you feel like this is so overwhelming, all this Jewish stuff. I don't have this background, I wasn't raised this way. And we see this every day. People walk in and they're fresh, they're new to Judaism. And the first thing we tell them, Ki korei velecha, don't worry, it's easy. It's near, it's close to you. Serving God isn't too hard. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't say, too much for me, let me try somewhere else. Ki korei velecha, it is near, it is close to you. Hadavar me'oid, very close to you. It's close. It's attainable. It's within reach. It's possible. It's realistic. This is what the verse tells us. And right at the beginning of the Tanya, in the title page, the Tanya tells us that I am here. The Alter Rebbe says the Tanya is here to tell you how is it so close to you? How is it so easy? And in chapter 17, we circle back to that. So that's the verse. So I'm going to stop the share, but we can get back to it if you want to see it again. So the Tanya asks, what does this mean that it is so close to you? And it prefaces with a question, so like this. The verse says, "Beficha," in your mouth, right? To verbalize Torah, to watch our speech. Okay, that's not too hard. It's tempting every once in a while, but okay, I get that. La asoisoi, to keep it, to do it, the word of action. Okay, I could control what I do and what I don't do. But the Tanya focuses its question on bilavavcha, in your heart. In your heart is referring to our emotions, our feelings. In other words, the verse is calling for an emotional Judaism. That our heart, our feelings should be within, for and in the right things. That's the question. What does that mean? How is that close? That we should have an emotion. In other words, we should have an emotion of attachment, of closeness, of love, and excitement for God, for Judaism, for another Jew, for the right things. I should have an awe of God. I shouldn't have an excitement for materialistic things. Is that so simple? The Tanya says, seemingly it's neged hachush shalom. Seemingly the heart begs to differ. It's just not the reality. Take a survey of 1,000 Jews, observant Jews, and ask them, when do they get more excited? Wow, I'm so excited. I can't wait. It's going to be Yom Kippur. And I get to go to synagogue and pray. Is that the excitement? Or I get to go to a pool party and eat pizza. What gets you more excited? Your drives, your imagination, your fantasies for the animal soul? That's where my heart is at? Or for the divine? Now, again, we're not talking about action. It's a lot easier to say, well, like, I'll control myself. I have excitement for areas which I should not do. I know it's wrong. I can control myself. The question is, how is it close to you? How is it so easy to control your heart? Not control your heart, to have an emotional attachment for God and his Torah. That's the question. Seemingly, it's just not for us. Seemingly, it's just not practical. Living a life of love of God, of awe of God, of love for a fellow Jew, seemingly, it's just not where we're at. That's the question. That's the opening question of chapter 17. Perhaps you may argue and say, you know what? Well, maybe when Moses says this verse, he wasn't referring to me and you. He was referring to his generation, the Jews of the desert. Those are lofty people. Those are people where it was easy for them to live in emotional Judaism. That was easy. For us, we're practical. We're talking about the do's and don'ts. Our emotions are in something else, but we can control our actions. But you can't expect that we should have an emotional Judaism, that our emotion, that's a tzaddik, right? That's a righteous person. We're not that. But we know that Tanya says that Torah is eternal. The Torah is nitzchis. Eternal Torah means that the ideas of the Torah are applicable to us the same way they were applicable 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and 5,000 years. It's the same thing. To say that the Torah does not apply to us because we are different, it's saying that the Torah is not eternal. It's like the guy who was, in Russia in a winter, in Russia, was having a very hard time getting home for Shabbos because there was so much snow. Just plowing through that snow, and he says, "Listen, God gave the Torah when it was June in the desert. It wasn't February in Russia, where there's so much snow." But obviously, Torah is eternal, and the Torah is for all times applicable to us as well. So what does this mean? What does this verse mean? What does it mean? It is so close to you. It's so within reach. Extremely. Including bilvavcha, even in your heart, to do it. So the Tanya basically in chapter 17 gives us the most important message. And it kind of builds on what we spoke about last week in chapter 16. If you remember, in chapter 16, we spoke that the Beinoni, who was the center of discussion over here, the Beinoni, just to remind you, right? The Beinoni is not the righteous person who has transformed their internal being, their emotions. They are not someone who has no struggle anymore. The Beinoni is someone who struggles internally, but isn't the Russia, because the Russia fails from time to time. The Beinoni always takes control. So in chapter 16, the Tanya tells us a very important idea, and that is that in order for this to be long-lasting, the Beinoni also has to have an inspiration. There has to be some type of inspiration behind the action, because otherwise it's a dry act. And a dry act, not necessarily, is very difficult to keep up. You can do it today, you can do it tomorrow, but if you're not pumped up, like a diet that lasts for 2 weeks, after that, if you're not fully excited about it, if there isn't an inspiration behind it, it's very difficult to keep it up. So Tanya says that there are two types of inspirations. One inspiration is an actual, tangible feeling and emotion and excitement and ahava, love and an awe of God. But if that's not attainable, here the verse tells us, la asoisoi. The main thing is, it's enough of an inspiration that will get you to do. And perhaps we could translate it as emotional appreciation. Intellectual appreciation, which could develop into an emotional appreciation, even if it's not an emotional feeling. My heart is not pumping stronger when I think about Yom Kippur and Shul, but it's an emotional appreciation. I thought about it long enough where now my heart agrees that this is something I should do. That type of bilvavcha, that type of emotion is attainable. Because our heart reacts to the mind. That's just the human condition. Human nature is that if you think about it long enough, you're going to be emotionally attached as well. And this is true in so many areas. No one's born with an excitement for sports. No one's born caring about politics. But if you watch enough sports, or if you read about enough sports, or you hear other people, if your mind is filled with sports, even if you don't have an excitement about it, you're at least going to have an appreciation for it. I can tell you with me, I don't follow professional sports. It's not my thing, right? But if I'm in shul and there's a Super Bowl coming up, or there's the Saints are doing well, and everyone is talking about it, and day in, day out, that's all they hear about. So it's not just an interesting conversation to listen to, but you start to get interested in it. So how do they do in this game? Did they do well? Then did they do well? What's their score? Are they got right? Because this is what your mind is filled with. Suddenly, your heart is kind of at least reacting to it, even if it's not a tangible emotion. At least you start getting an emotional appreciation for it. Same is true in every area of life. The same is true with our service to God as well. The more we study Torah, the more we occupy our minds with the divine, with God and his wisdom, that's automatically our heart will react. The heart will follow. And even if we don't wake up in the morning with like, wow, God, I'm so happy to serve you today. We may not be there. But at least we have an appreciation for it. And that itself is enough to lead us, to lead us to action, to the world of action, to our behaviors. And that is what the Tanya says, the verse is telling us. This is very close to you. What is close to you? Beficha, to study Torah with your mouth. To study. And as we said last week, study itself has to come with hisboinenus, contemplation, meditation. Take the ideas that you have studied intellectually and think about it. Contemplate on it. Take a few moments, close your eyes, and just think through the idea. Make it real. Internalize it. The same way you wake up in the morning and you think about, who am I today? What type of spouse am I going to be today? What type of parent am I going to be today? Although we know the information, but taking 2 minutes while you're drinking your morning coffee with no distractions and just closing your eyes and thinking about it makes it real. The same is true with an intellectual idea that's God's wisdom. If I study Tanya, if I study the daily Torah portion, Parsha, if I do some prayer or whatever study of Torah I'm able to do, and I don't just read the book and close it and now go on and with my day, but I read the book and then I close my eyes and think about it for a few minutes. What does that mean to me? How do I internalize it? Now, the more we fill our minds with it and deliberate thinking, that allows our heart to appreciate it as well. And then, la asoso, then that will bring to keeping it long term to the world of action. And this, the Tanya tells us, is what it means to be a Beinun. This is where he wraps up 17 chapters of the book of the Beinun. Chapter 18 already begins a beautiful idea about our inner love for God, but that's already a different discussion. But in chapter 17, we wrap up the primary idea of the Tanya that you can be a Beinoni. It's very practical because a Beinoni, like we said, does not have to fully control their emotions. And we don't have to get rid of any type of animalistic, selfish self. We have that inner struggle, and that's okay. But the main thing is our behavior, our deliberate behavior, our thoughts, our speech, and our action are fully in control by the Beinoni. And how is that done? Because the Beinoni knows, study, contemplate, emotional reaction, enough to make sure that he's inspired enough, she's inspired enough to keep going and controlling those urges and controlling our thoughts, speech, and actions, that they should only be in line with what God wants of us, with what God wants of us. So that's how the Tanya wraps up these 17 chapters. You can be a Beinun. Beinun is very practical. And just to kind of give a very short synopsis of these 17 chapters and how he developed this idea. He started off talking about the two souls. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 speaks about the two souls. We have the animalistic self, the selfish drive, the ego within us, which is just human nature. Yes, many negative characteristics come from it, stem from it, but by its essence is self-preservation, right? What feels good for self, that's the animal soul. And we have a godly soul, which is selfless, altruistic, doing things for others, doing things for God. And each of these souls have a operating system. They have the powers of the soul, how it takes in ideas from the world around him or her, our mind and our heart. And then we also have the garments of the soul, the thoughts, speech, and action, the way it's expressed. And what we said is that the tzaddik, the righteous person, has control over their souls, which means they have liberated. They've got rid of their animal soul. So they're only living a divine soul life, a completely divine life, a selfless life, a life fully altruistic, no inner struggle. That's the tzaddik. The Beinoni is in control of their expressions, of their garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action, but not necessarily of their inner self. And the Rasha is kind of a person who has both are in control, and it varies from animal soul is completely in control, and then just the godly soul once in a while steps in, or even the opposite, which hopefully most of us are, where our godly soul generally is the one that controls it. But once in a while we fail, whether once a day, once a week, once a year, but we're not fully in control of our behaviors. The Beinoni is that in betweener because they have the inner struggle, but they have full control of their expression of their behavior. And we gave some tools for the Beinoni. The Beinoni has daily inspiration. Every morning they pray. The daily knows the human condition of the mind controls the heart. We are in control of ourselves. The Beinoni lives in the here and now. Could I control myself right now? The Beinoni also has the general inspiration through learning Torah, contemplating on it, and having at least an emotional reaction of appreciation that this is what I want to do, and that is enough to keep him going, to have control over the garments of the soul, the thought, the speech, and the action. And I want to just conclude because it's almost Pesach, almost Passover. One of the ideas that we learned, I think, in chapter 15, is that the Beinoni, although as long as the Beinoni is in control of its behavior, that's already enough to keep that status of a Beinoni. But there's also a Beinoni who serves God. In other words, a Beinoni that always grows, always goes beyond its comfort zone. That's a true Beinoni. There's also a Beinoni that just keeps the status quo, but a real Beinoni really should be always serving God in a way, growing. We spoke about the idea of if someone studies 100 times, you study 101 times. If someone, it's like the idea of taking a taxi, instead of going 10 miles, you're going 11 miles, always pushing yourself. And really, that kind of is also the idea of Passover, of Pesach. Because Pesach is a time where we have the Exodus of Egypt. The Exodus of Egypt is not something that only happened thousands of years ago, but we all have our own little Exodus. Our Egypt is our limitations, our box. In Hebrew, Mitzrayim, Egypt, Mitzrayim means limitation, means boundaries. We all have our boundaries up until this point. I can't do anymore. This is my limit. We all have a certain point where we say, I've reached my limit. As a parent, we have this many times with our children. I'm about to lose it. I've reached my limit of patience. I'm about to, right? We all have our limits, and that's Mitzrayim. That's our our little personal Egypt, and we have to go beyond. We have to think out of the box, and when we push ourselves a little bit to go a little bit out of my comfort zone, because I know it's the right thing, even though I'm not so comfortable in this space, that means that we have left Egypt today. Tomorrow, gotta leave Egypt again. Once we get used to this new Egypt, this new exodus of Egypt, that itself becomes a new Egypt. We got to go above and beyond. So one of my go-to stories in talking about this leaving Egypt is with this guy who in the 80s had a very successful career, very successful business. The business was he sold cell phones. Sorry. He owned many payphones for Verizon in New Jersey, right? Once upon a time, many years ago, there was something called payphones, where you took your quarter and you put it into this public phone, right? We all know what a payphone. Go to your museum, you see payphones. So he, in the 80s, owned, I don't know if it was a dozen or dozens or hundreds, I'm not sure the number, but many payphones around New Jersey. And he did well. He did well. Payphones was the in thing. Yeah, we had collect calls and things like that, but people were paying, putting in quarters, and he was making good money. But one day, he's driving down whatever street in New Jersey, and he sees a sign: Verizon cell phones. Verizon selling cell phones. He comes into the store. He sees, yes, it's a real thing. Verizon opened a cell phone store, and he's thinking, cell phones. This is the worst thing. It's the worst thing for me. I have payphones. Who's going to use payphones if they have cell phones? And he noticed over some time that less and less quarters were being inserted into his payphones. So he came to Verizon and he says, "What's going on over here? You're shooting yourself in the leg. You're opening these cell phone stores, and now no one's using payphones." So he was a long, they knew him well. They worked with him for many years, so they wanted to make it work. They wanted to make him happy. Say, okay, you know what? We understand that it's hurting your business. This is our proposal. Our proposal is that you will have the exclusive rights to open Verizon cell phones in New Jersey or in these counties of New Jersey. That's a pretty lucrative offer. He says, cell phones, I don't want any cell phones. I demand that Verizon does not open any cell phones. He didn't take that offer. He said, I know payphones. Payphones is a good business. It worked for many years. I don't want cell phones. Close cell phones. Well, guess what? Verizon did not listen to him. Maybe he sued them. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what type of case he had against them. He did not accept this offer. And today, hopefully he has enough money to buy some food for Shabbos. What's the point? I mean, hopefully he's doing well. I don't know who he is. I heard the story, but I hope he's doing well. What's the point? The point is that sometimes people have a hard time thinking out of the box, right? If he would have accepted that offer, I mean, of course, he would have made it, naturally, he would have made it very big. But the point is, sometimes it's hard to think out of the box. I know cell phones. I know payphones. I don't know cell phones, so I'm not going into a new industry. This is the way I see things, and if it doesn't fit into my little picture, my little box, my little comfort zone, it's not for me. We all have within our life in general, and of course with our religious life, which should be our life in general, as the Tanya argues, we have areas of comfort. I'm very comfortable doing this. I see myself doing this. That is just not me. Just not me. And what did the Tanya say? Service of God is someone who goes a little bit, maybe not a major leap, just a little bit, one extra step out of the line, right? A little uncomfortable. It's not really what I usually do. I've never done it before. It's not but I'll do it anyways. I'll try it out. I'll push myself. That is serving God. That's what a B'nai has to do. So if it could be in quantity, it could be in quality, it could be in so many different areas whether it means I usually study for 5 minutes, I'm studying that for 7 minutes, whether it means I usually don't invite other people to my home, or I don't usually whatever, and I'll do it anyways. I'll call someone who I'm a little bit uncomfortable with. I haven't spoken to her in many years, and I heard that she needs some help. I'll give her a call. I don't feel so comfortable about. I'll do it anyway, right? Small little things where it's a little bit out of our box. Just not what I do. I don't do this. I'll do it anyways. That means I am living Passover today. I'm living in Exodus of Egypt every day. I'll leave you with that. Now, we have concluded 17 chapters of Tanya. Chapter 18 begins section 2, part 2 of Tanya. Part 2 of Tanya. What we're going to do, we're going to take a little break over the next few weeks. It's also Passover. So I'm also, this whole schedule is different. So starting from next week, we're going to take, I think it's 3 or 4 weeks off. Let me check the calendar quickly right now. I know Lynn's upset. In fact, because I saw Lynn's reaction, I'll say like this. Next week we'll have class. It's not going to be a Tanya class. It'll be a Passover class. We'll give a class on the Haggadah. Okay? We'll speak a little about the Haggadah. So next, I'm looking at my calendar right now. Next week, April 11th, is going to be a class on Passover. And the 18th and the 25th and the 2nd, those 3 weeks we're going to be off.